Gematria first. That's our first part. So the first thing is, what does the word Gematria mean? Now there are two classic derivations for the word Gematria. Either that it is a variant of the Greek word for geometry, or that it comes from a different two Greek words being Gamatreia. Gamatreia means gamma is 3. So the bottom line is Gematria comes from a Greek word, and it either refers to math or refers to letters substituting for numbers. What this already indicates to us is something that Gematria is not something that is unique to Judaism. Gematria, the fact that letters represent numbers, is a very, very ancient thing. The reason is because people didn't develop numerals to represent numbers until fairly late. It was only in basically the 8th or 9th century that it became common for people to use numerals instead of to represent numbers. Up until that point, people used letters to represent numbers. And we still have that, like the Roman numerals that we have and all that kind of stuff. And that's why in Chazal, whenever they want to say 2 Eidim, they say Bet Eidim. Or they want to say Chamisha Chumshei Torah, they say Hey Chumshei Torah. Because there was no notation, there was no symbol for the number 5 other than the letter Hey, the 5th letter of the alphabet. And this is true in Judaism, and this is true in other cultures as well, and it was like a universal kind of a thing. And we even have a little bit relics of that today when we still use, Greek symbols for pi and, things of this nature. And that's why the prakim and everything we call, daf bet and perek chaf, and that's not to be from, that's because there's no numbers, there's no such thing. So the idea of having like that the letters mean certain things in numbers, that everybody in the ancient world would go for, and there's even relics of this. I found that there's Assyrian documents from basically that they found from the time basically of the sort of end period of Tanakh when the Aseret Shvatim were kicked out. And in the Assyrian language, they say, and the number value of this is this, and therefore that. So this is something that everybody, let's say in the Near Eastern world, was doing. All right, so that's number one. Now we're going to see the Jewish approach to this kind of practice. So we're going to start with the earliest mention of this, which is the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, we have here in Pirkei Avot, at the very end of the 3rd parak of Pirkei Avot, Rav Elazar Chasma Omer, he says that Kinin upitchei nida hen gufei Torah. The real things that is Torah is kinin, which is to figure out with these bird offerings when one flies away and things of this nature. Upitchei nida, working out the cycle for women when they don't have a normal cycle and to get back to a normal cycle, and they involve a lot of complicated calculations. It says that's gufei Torah, that's the real Torah. However, he says, alachot kufot v'gimatriot, but things having to do with the equinox and gimatria, that's parperaot lachochma. That is not like the real gufei Torah, that's something else, and he calls it something parperaot lachochma. What does that mean, parperaot lachochma? Well, the general way to understand parperaot means that parperaot means like it's an appetizer. In other words, what this Mishnah then means is that learning math, that's like an appetizer. That's like not the real thing. But the real thing is really applying math. Because for kinin, you have to figure out, probability and things. And pitchei nida also is math-related things, but has a Torah application. And the Meiri then, when he explains what is Gematria, he says it is Chochmat HaTchuna v'hamispar v'hatishboret v'hashiur. Basically math. So knowing math is good, but it's only good because it leads you to figuring out halachot. And that's the idea. So you see that the Meiri uses the term Gematria basically to mean math. If we look at the other classic mefarshim on the Mishnah, on Pirkei Avot, we have here the Bartanura. The Bartanura says, what is Gimatriot? Cheshbon ha'otiyot. In other words, the number value of letters. Tosot Yom Tov, he explains like this. He says, what this means is, Bimkom echad kotvim aleph, bimkom meya kotvim kuf. In other words, and he says it's chokhmat hamedida, it's basically math. So the original understanding of Gematria is simply to mean math. Now, in this discussion, we will also see that the Aruch, who is a very early Rishon, and basically one of the first people to write a Gemara dictionary, so he writes, what is the word Gematria? And here he's going to say a crazy kind of an explanation. He says, Gematria is Parperaot LaChochma. Okay, and what is the Gematria? Bimkom echad, kotvim aleph. Very good. But what does Parperaot mean? Everyone, up until now, the standard explanation is that it's an appetizer. It leads you to Chochma, but it's not really the real deal. He says something else. No. Parperot l'chochma, parperot is also a Greek word. And what does it mean? Belashon Yevani, in Greek it means igulim. It means circle. What does parperot mean? It means, what is that, like the periphery? Yes? So he says, Ki ha-chochmot netunot kemerkaz betoch agula hagimatria. He says, because the wisdom is like the middle of a circle of Gematria, which is math. So therefore, Parperaot LaChochma is that the math is the periphery, and then the real Chochma is the stuff in the middle. So that's a cute thing. So then it turns out that Mishnah basically is almost completely in Greek, yes? He says, Gematria means math is the periphery of wisdom. All right, very nice. So there you go. So you see, the original in the Mishnah, when they use the term Gematria, it really means math. Now, in the Gemara, however, they use the term Gematria to mean any number of things. And here you'll see what it means. Here the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Chavbet discusses the story in Sefer Daniel of the writing on the wall. Now what happened was, in Parakeh of Daniel, Belshazzar, the king, has a feast. A hand appears, writes on a wall. None of the Chachamim of Bavel can interpret what it means. Daniel comes and he reads it right away, and he's able to say what it means. And that's where we get that expression, he didn't see or he didn't understand the writing on the wall. Very nice. Now the question that the Chachamim and the Gemara deal with is, how come the Babylonians could not read the writing on the wall and Daniel could? Hey, so one of the explanations is, Amarav begimatria ichtiv lahon. It was written in Gematria. What does it mean it was written in Gematria? And then he goes on and says what it is, but Rashi basically then interprets for us it means it was written be'at bash. It was written in the code where instead of an aleph you put a taf, and instead of a bet you put a shin, and all that. But that's what Rav in the Gemara calls Gematria. So you see that the term Gematria, as used in the Mishnah, means math, and in terms of the Gemara it means a code. And what it really means is when you use a letter to indicate something other than that letter, whether it is a number, math, or whether it is another letter, and that's a code. That's what Gematria really means. Okay, and now using Gematria for the Torah. The really famous place that we have the idea that Gematria is okay to use for the Torah is the Ramban in his introduction to the Torah, and he says like this, V'chol hanimsar leMoshe Rabbeinu b'sharei habinah. Everything that was given to Moshe, Hakol nichtav b'Torah b'ferush, everything is written in the Torah either explicitly or beremizah, or it's hinted to. And he says, what are the ways that things are hinted to in the Torah? One of the ways is Gematriot. Another one is Tzurat ha'otiyot, even the way the letters look could hint to something. But the Ramban says Gematria is something that is a legitimate way to understand things in the Torah. Basically, it seems then that the understanding is that these letters are in fact, the fact is that in ancient times they did represent numbers, and they in fact should represent numbers, and it's okay they represent numbers, and that then has some kind of a meaning. Now, Panei Achraza, which is a Tosfot era, Sefer, who's very, very into Gematrias, here in Breshit, in the very beginning of Breshit, he says, hey, Breshit in Gematria comes out B'Torah Yatzar. In other words, God created the world with the Torah. That's Panei Achraza says. But then, having said that, he says, Uminayin legimatriot mina Torah. But how do you know that, Gematria is cool? He says, Dichtiv, because it says, Ki lo davar reik hu mikem. Okay, very nice. It says, lo davar, in Dvarim, at the end, it says, Lo davar reik hu mikem. It's not an empty thing, and the gematria of that phrase, ki lo davar reik hu mikem, the gematria is gematriot. Okay, so there you go, and that works out very well. However, yeah, and it's a bit circular. So now the thing is that the Panei Achraza, even though it was written in the 1300s, there was a commentary written on it in the 1500s by a person, Mahari Katz, that kind of got interpolated into the text. And he writes, Aval kasher, wait a second, you can't say that. How do we know that that is okay? So now he says, I will find an internal place in the Torah to show you that Gematria is real, and this is now cool. He says, it says like this, he says, because when it talks about the Malkot that a person is supposed to get, they call the person that is getting the makot, this is a famous thing, is called achecha, your brother. Meaning that even if a person, is a sinner, you still look at him as his brother. And he says, what does the word achecha come out in Gematria? It comes out to 39. So you see internally that's where you get the 39 malkot. So I will tell you that is the idea, and that's his proof. Okay, listen, so, there you get it sort of, one way or the other. So Gematria is considered something legitimate. However, if you look in the Gemara, and if we look at sort of some of the famous Gematria that are in the Gemara, like, for example, the Gematria where it says that Avraham Avinu, when he went out to war, he had 318 men with him, yes? And the drash is that it's really Eliezer, yes? But look how the Gemara says it. It says, it says, Ika da'amri Eliezer hu, dechush b'nei hache. Because the calculation is this. So you see, well, let's give another example, and then I think we'll see maybe the lesson from it. Here is another super famous gematria from Eruvin Daf Samachei. It says like this. Hey, you know that idea? Nichnas yayin yatsa sod. Yeah, you drink and the secrets come out. He says, yayin nitan be'ayin otiyot. Wine is given in 70 letters. In other words, its numerical value is 70. The sod is also be'ayin otiyot. Nichnas yayin yatsa sod. But you see here that does the Gemara not do? The Gemara does not necessarily use the term gematria. What do they say? B'chush b'nei, right? In mathematical calculation. And again, this goes to show you that they didn't understand gematria as something like, I don't know how to say it. It's not weird and unusual. It's simply the way it's math. That's really what it is. Now, let's look over here. What do we have? The Gemara in Brachot. Here they do use the term gematria. So sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. They say, here's the example. They say, Tanya nami hachai teisha me'ot v'shlosha minei mita nivru ba'olam. There are 930 ways to die. All right, they say, right, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So now we know how many, It's with a knife, there's a lot of ways. Anyway, because it says, Shene'emar lamavet totsaot. That's in Tehillim, right? Like there's a lot of paths of death. And the word totsaot begimatria hachi havu, and then it comes out in gematria. So the Gemara sometimes uses the term gematria to mean gematria, and sometimes uses the term gematria to mean atbash, and sometimes uses different words to mean the word gematria. However, by the time we get to the later kind of way to understand things, which is the Rishonim, and we see here, this is the Gemara in Megillah brings one of these famous gematriot that the Tosfot brings. By the time of the Rishonim, the word gematria was used exclusively for what we call today gematria. So basically, the Mishnah was math. In the Gemara, it was math and codes. By the time we get to the regular Rishonim, it's already always the way we call it. And that's how the term at least developed. And here we have, what's Tosod, a nice gematria from Tosod. Vayomer HaMelech LaHaman, HaKesef Natum L'chai. Here's the, you can do whatever you want. V'ha'am la'asot bo ketov beinach. You can do whatever you want. And you're funded, you can just do it. And Tosot says, Gematria of HaKesef is Ha'etz. Ramaz lo she'itla alav. That's a remez that you are going to be hanged on a tree. Very nice. Okay, so there you go. That's Gematria. Now, in order for Gematria to work, though, it only works if Aleph is really the first letter, and Bet is the second letter, and so on. Which leads us to the question of, how do we know what the order of the Aleph Bet is? Now, in other words, where did the order of the Aleph Bet come from? So that's a big question. What? It comes from Art Scroll. They're the ones who invented it.
Shiloh Sitter way before Art Scroll.
So what happens is that there is something called an abecedary. An abecedary is a written inscription of the ABCs in order. And people would use this to practice their ABCs and so on and so forth. Now we have very, very ancient versions of this. And here from this nice book by Joseph Navet, Early History of the Alphabet, here we have a Ugaritic one. And this Ugaritic one is from the 14th century BCE, which is basically, I don't know, I don't know, like when the dinosaurs were around. And
4 centuries before that.
And here it looks like this. Now, what are the letters? The first letter is, he writes out in English for you, is an A. The second one is a B. And it's 27 letters, but basically it follows the order that we have today. What happened later was that the Phoenicians, they dropped 5 letters out of this Ugaritic alphabet, leaving 22 letters, and that's basically the letters that we have today, and that's what the Greeks have, and in English we have it, and in Hebrew, and all of this kind of thing. So the order of letters of the alphabet was something that already in Torah times was like standardized in some fashion among the people that the Jewish people knew, and everyone around, there was a thing. However, there's a little bit of a twist. The twist is as follows. On Tisha B'Av, when we read Megillat Eicha, you notice that in Megillat Eicha, the prakim are written as acrostics, right? We have Aleph Bet order. However, there is a bit of a twist in some of the prakim. That is, in Perek Bet Gimel Dalet, we have an Ayin Pei transposition. So instead of having Samach Ayin Pei Psukim, we have Samach Pei Ayin. And that's a little bit of a mysterious kind of a thing. Now, why is it that we have this kind of a transposition? The Gemara in Sanhedrin asks this question, and in fact it's brought by Rashi in Eicha. It says like this, Mahikdim Pei La'ayin, this is in Sanhedrin Kuv Dalet Amud Bet, Bishvil Meraglim. This in some fashion hints to the Meraglim. Shamru bifihem mashelo ra'u be'eineihem. Because they said something with their peh, what their eyes didn't see. So their peh came before their eyes. Right? They said something. Okay, very good. So there you go. Now, so now that's a nice explanation. But you see that this idea of the samach ayin pei tzadi kuf, that should be universal. I mean, we have it in Hebrew and we have it in English too, right? What do we say? We have mem nun, right? Mem nun, L-M-N, mem nun, samech. Then we have ayin pei tzadi kuf, right? And that's ayin pei is O-P. And then the tzadi they dropped because they don't like the tzadi. In Greek they dropped it. But then we have the kuf, which is the Q. So it's the same kind of thing. We have it in English, the letters, it's all the same. However, the mysterious thing is that they actually found some abecedaries in Israel from the time of the Shoftim. And out of all the abecedaries that they found over there, in all of them that reach that high in the alphabet, they found that the Ayin Pei is transposed. Even though the Ugaritic one has it the way we have it today, and later ones have it the way we have it today, but in the time of Shoftim, apparently there were some versions of the Aleph Bet that had the ayin come before the pei, leading to the idea that certain parts of the Aleph Bet were not entirely settled, and there were different versions of this. And therefore, I think the real way to understand the Gemara and Sanhedrin is, why did they use the alternative acrostic in Eicha?
Feshbon worked out.
Right. What? Because
Feshbon works out when it's in the order that we have now.
Yeah, the gematria, the number gematria works out the order we have now. Yeah, this would just completely wreck all the gematria if we go by this alternative ABC. But what it seems is that, I don't know if it matters to people what's the order of the letters, but because there were two alternatives around, they sometimes would employ the other one to make this like special, kind of point as you have. Now, based on this, and now here we get to the shocking, I don't know, whatever, but based on this, there was an approach, but I don't know, if you like this or not like this, but you have to pick it for yourself. But there's people out there, first of all, the shocker is that they found the Dead Sea Scrolls version of Eicha that also Perek Aleph has the Pei Ayin switch, not only Perek Bet. And also there are sometimes the Greek translation, the Septuagint, sometimes when they translate the acrostic, it seems that they had a different version with the Pei Ayin switched. Now let's read Perek Tehillim, Perek Lamed Dalet. Hey, this is a great parak that everybody knows. Look what it says for Pasuk Nun. Oh, let's look for Pasuk Yud Gimel. Mi ha'isha chafetz chayim ohev yamim lirot tov. Very nice, great mem pasuk. Netzor lashon chamera usfatecha medaber mirma. A great Nun pasuk. Sur mera ve'aseh tov bakesh shalom v'rodfehu. A nice samech pasuk. Einei Hashem el tzadikim. God's eyes look upon the tzadikim. The oznav el shavatam, and He listens to their prayers. Very nice. Pnei Hashem be'osei ra. Hashem's face looks at the people who do evil. Lahachrit me'eretz zichram, to cut them off from the world. Pei. Now tzadi. Tza'aku ve'Hashem shamea. They call out and Hashem listens. Umikol tsarotam hitzilam, and He saves them from all trouble. And now you're like, wait a minute, wait. Are there Risha'im in Pasuk Yud Zayin, the people calling out in Pasuk Yud Chet? So Rashi says, no. Look what Rashi says, Tza'aku, who's doing the screaming? The Tzadikim are doing the screaming. So therefore, there is a suggestion out there that really, if we switch the Pei Ayin, this Tehillim flows a lot better. How would it go? It would go like this. Pnei Hashem be'osei ra, la'achrit me'eretz zichram, pei, then ayin, einei Hashem al tzadikim, v'oznav el shavatam, tza'aku v'Hashem shamea, u'mikol tzaratam haitzilam. Alright, just to let you know, that could be controversial, or I don't know, however you feel about that, but there you go. So we have this kind of ayin pei thing going on. Yeah?
Not the only major difference that we have in Dead Sea Scrolls.
No, that's true.
Meaning we have beautiful pshetlach explaining why we're missing a nun in Ashrei.
And then they have a nun.
They have one.
They have a nun, right.
Yael Ziegler wrote a whole paper on that.
Right, about their nun pasuk and things. What? The nun, they have, I don't know, what was the nun pasuk?
But Yael seems to think, Yael seems to think that their nun pasuk they made up.
Right. To fit it in.
That it works, but it doesn't really fit the...
Right. So that's why I'm saying that it seems that there were two alphabets orders out there, at least with the Pei Ayin thing, and therefore in writing Eicha, they sometimes used one and sometimes used the other. Alrighty, now let's look here in the Mishnayot of Shkalim. In Shkalim, we also have something that at least may or may not indicate a whole other kind of thing, which is Shkalim Peragim Mishnah Bet. It says B'shalosh kupot shel shalosh se'in tormin et halishka. Okay, right when they would give the donations to the Beit Mikdash, there would be 3 containers for these donations that they would collect. Katuv Bahan Aleph Bet Gimel, and they would be marked Aleph Bet Gimel. Well, why were they marked Aleph Bet Gimel? Because as we said, there was no 1, 2, 3 at that time, so they'd write Aleph Bet Gimel. Very good. Rabbi Yishmael says Yevanit Katuv Bahem, Alpha, Beta, Gamla, he calls it. He says it was written in Greek, which indicates that it could, that in the Beit Mikdash, it could be that they were using Greek, well, it seems that they were, at least according to Rabbi Shmuel, they were using Greek letters to signify numbers. Now, this opens up a whole other ballpark, which is that occasionally you find in the Midrash that the same things that Chazal do with Hebrew Gematria, they also apply to Greek. And let's see sort of an example. All right, here we go. In the Medrash Rabbah, we have a story about a guy who had a dream. It says like this. Chad Barnash azal legabe Rav Yossi bar Chalafta. He went to Rav Yossi bar Chalafta and he says, Amalei chamit bechalmei, amrili azal sav po'alei da'avuch min kapodkia. He says, I had a dream, and in the dream people told me, get your father's money from Kapodkia. Now, Kapodkia is Cappadocia, which is now part of Turkey. Okay, so now he says, that was my dream. Go to this country and get the money. All right, what does Rav Yossi bar Chalafta say? Amalei v'azal avuch leKapodkia minyame. Did your father ever go to Kapodkia? He says, no. He says, no, there's no, he never went there. He says, no, this is what you got to do. Zil male chaf share bekarsa de beitach umashkachle. What you have to do is count 20 beams of your house, and at the 20th beam, that's where the money is. All right. Amalei leipahon chaf. I don't have 20 beams. I don't know how many beams he had, but he didn't have 20. He says, okay. If you don't have 20 beams, what you got to do is mane min roshehon lesofehon. You have to mean sofehon leroshein. In other words, you have to start front to back and then sort of come back, yeah. And whatever winds up 20, dig there. Okay. Azal mana ve'ashkach ken. He dug up at that 20th beam and he found the money. Okay, very nice. Uminayin yalef. How did he know? How did Rav Yossi bar Chalafta know that? He says he knew it mean Kapodkia. He knew it from the word Kapodkia. What does that even mean? The Matnot Kahuna says Kapo hu belashon Yavan korot, because kapo means beams in Greek. I don't know if it does or not, but I don't know Greek, but that's what he's saying. And Dakia belashon Yavan esrim. Dakia, like Deka, Dakia, I guess is the two. So yeah, so Kapo Dekaya means beam 20. So there you go. So now you see that not only could we darshan out Hebrew, but we could even darshan out Greek. So that's really incredible. Now let's look over here, and there's another one which I think is even more exciting. And well, the 20 beam thing, that was super exciting, but this is maybe more so. And here it says like this, this is Parsha Yudaled, it says like this. Oh my gosh, he says like this. Now the Gemara has this idea that if a baby is born in the 7th month, after 7 months pregnancy, then he'll survive, but 8 months is not. Even though the Chatam Sofer says that was only then, and now it's different, but at least that's how it used to be. Look what it says. So they say, Baon Kame de Rabbi Avahu. They asked Rabbi Avahu, and it seems that these are non-Jewish people, maybe even Greeks who asked him. Minayin shahanotza l'shivachai. How do you know that someone who is born after 7 months is alive? Amar lahon mididchon ana memate lachon. I know it from your own language. How does this work? He says, Zeta afta eta uchta. Okay, what that means is, well, Zeta is the letter Zeta, and then he says Eta. Anyway, I don't know, so I had to look up. Well, luckily I had the Saul Lieberman's book, Hellenism in Jewish Palestine, where he explains what this means, and he says as follows. He says, it means, he told them, Zeta is 7, and the other one, which is, is 8. It means infants of 7 months are more likely to survive than those of 8. Apparently the word Zeta also means like survival or life. So there you go. So now he figured it out from the Greek, letters. Now you're saying, but wait a second, what are we, darshaning Greek? Is like that? That's what we're doing? And look here, it says in the Perush of the Maharzu, who lived in the 1900s, he says, Belashon Yavani od Zeta ole b'mispar shiva, and Ada is Shmona, and Zeta means Tichya. That's what Saul Lieberman said. He said it too. And Ada means Hashchata. Ada means you will die. Okay, very nice. In Ken, that's how it works. And now he ends it, he says, Shechazal dorshin lashon Yevani, kmo shedorshin lashon HaKodesh, because you could do drushes of Greek just like you do drushes of Hebrew. There you go. Alrighty. So apparently you can. So that's where we got up to so far. So what have we learned about Gematria? We learned about Gematria that it is universal, at least, at that time. And we learned that it is something that they did in different languages, and also on some level that Chazal did it also, not only in Hebrew, but also in Greek. Very good, that is part one. Now part two is the topic of wordplay. Now, the topic of wordplay, which is sort of unconnected to Gematria, but whatever, and it is just for fun, is the end of the summer, so there you go. And it says, so now you see sometimes in Tanakh, people have these like funny turns of phrase. So here's a classic where you have Shimshon. Shimshon is beating down on these Philistines with a jawbone of a chamor. Vayomer Shimshon belechi chamor chamortayim. With the, let's read this in the English. It says, with the jawbone of a donkey, heap upon heaps. But the word for heap is chamor. That's the word for pile. So it's like a fun play on words. Say, with a lechi of the chamor, I'm making a chamor, like piles. Very nice. And even the Mitzudat David says, this is like a word play. Very nice. So Shimshon makes a play on words.
Well, we know he liked puzzles.
He liked it. He's cool with it, so that's great. Now let's look at another one. Here we have in Shoftim, let's go now to Perek Yud, and here in Perek Yud, it says here, Pasuk Daled says, this is talking about Yair HaGiladi, who is one of these like two Pasuk Shoftim that, you sort of gloss over. And look what it says. Vayihi lo shloshim banim rochvim al shloshim ayarim. He had 30 boys, 30 sons, who would ride on 30 ayarim. What are ayarim? Here in the English they call it colts. Ushloshim ayarim lahem. And they have 30 ayarim. Now what does ayarim there mean? Towns, right? They own 30 towns. So here again you have ayarim and ayarim. And the Radak says about this, that this is an example of something that we call tzachut lashon. Yeah, a cute turn of phrase. To use the same word to have two different meanings in the same pasuk. Okay, now Shoftim is written by Shmuel, so we say, hey, Shmuel also liked, to have the cute turn of phrase. And this is something also that I think is also a wordplay, and I remember Jonathan Ben Ezra in Richmond would always consider, but I haven't seen any Chazal people mention this. However, this is in Shmuel Aleph, when Shmuel is telling Shaul that he did bad by keeping all the sheep of Amalek alive. So what does he say? Vayomer Shmuel, umeh kol hatzon hazeh be'oznai. Right? And I think that that's pretty self-evident that is, instead of saying ma, he said meh, and that's a bit of a cute, turn of a phrase as well.
You don't really know that cows said moo back then.
I think this is a sheep that says meh.
Right. Yeah. Sheep say meh, and cows say
moo.
But in Israel, dogs say hav.
That's
and
true.
in America they say
that's
bark.
The fact that a dog says hav,
woof.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's all. That could have really changed.
That could have changed. I don't know. That's just.
I don't know what Old MacDonald did that.
So I don't know. I haven't seen any Chazal person say it, but I don't know. I think it could be, especially if he wrote that ayarim thing. Maybe there's a little bit of a thing there.
It was a printer's mistake.
I don't know. It's not a printer's mistake. It's a Masoretic mistake because it's the ma instead of a meh. It depends what nikud you put over there. But the thing gets really crazy. Now I'll tell you what. Then we even have the famous example, or sort of a famous example, when Hashem tells Moshe to make the sraf, right? He says, Bnei Israel have been bad, and they're all, dying from these snake bites, right? And what is the way to do this? Make a sraf, and it says, whoever looks at the snake will get better, yes? And what does it say? We call it a nachash hanechoshet, yes? And again, the Midrash says, why did Moshe make it out of Nechoshet if Hashem didn't tell him anything in particular? He says, well, Nachash, it says, Rashi brings this down, Lo ne'amar lo lasoto shel Nechoshet ela amar Moshe. If Hashem called it a Nachash, I'll make it Nechoshet, Lashon nefel al Lashon. So here Moshe also himself sort of does like a word thing. Even though the Chizkuni gives a completely different explanation. The Chizkuni says, no, there's a practical reason why it was made out of Nechoshet. He says, why? Lefisha Nechoshet mavhik umavrik. So it's very shiny. He says, listen, everyone who got a snake bite has to see this thing, yes? He says, Machanei Yisrael haya shalosh parsot al shalosh parsot. It was a huge encampment. Mishaya nashuch ro'ehu mimkomo. So everyone could see it from far. So that's why you had to make it shiny. All right, but the traditional explanation is that it's Lashon nefel al Lashon. So we see that Shmuel does it. We see that Shimshon does it. We see that Moshe on some level does it. However, there is a bit of a mysterious part over here when we have the end of Perek, what we call the end of Perek Bet of Bereshit, and the beginning of Perek Gimel of Bereshit. Look what it says here. Vayushnehem arumim ha'adam ve'ishto v'lo yitboshashu. Okay? Adam and Chava were naked and they were not embarrassed. The next pasuk, va'nachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh. And the snake was the most arum of all of the creatures in the field. And there arum is understood to be clever, crafty, something like that. And the Radak says, these are two different words and, and all of that. Very nice. But look what the Ibn Ezra says. The Ibn Ezra says as follows. V'al titameh ba'avor hayot arum achar eruim. Don't be surprised that it says arum about a snake. The pasuk it says after it says arum about Adam and Chava. V'hem shnei tamim, even though they meet in different things. Ki be'ele hatzachut balashon. Because this is tzachut lashon, to write things in a cute way, to have the same word have two different meanings, right in the same pasuk or two pasukim. And he says, what is just like Lachi HaChamor, like with Shimshon and the Shloshim Ayarim that we saw. Now this, I think, is a whole different ball game, right? Because this is not something that Shimshon is saying. It's not even something that Shmuel is writing. It's not even something that Moshe is kind of figuring out. This
is the narrative.
This is God. This is Hashem. Now this is then, and again, I think that's why the Radak, who usually will go and say this is a tzachut lashon, and he says that in Nevi'im, no problem, but he won't say it about this. But the Ibn Ezra does. What this then is a whole other ballpark thing, basically saying that when we say that the Torah is written like Kilshon B'nai Adam, we mean that even the wordplay that people like Shimshon like to do, that's also put in the narrative of the Torah itself. However, now I don't know, again, if this is either shocking or not, I don't know if it's shocking or not. However, and look, if you look then in the Onkelos, how Onkelos translated this the psukim, what does he say? Vahavu tarvehon artilain. Artilain is naked. That's how the Gemara calls naked. Okay. And what about the snake? How was Arum translated by Onkelos over there? Vechivya have chakim. Okay, he was chakim, which means smart. Okay, so he translates in two different ways. However, Targum Yonatan has a different way. He says like this: Vahavu tarvehon chakimin, Adam ve'im tate. He says that Adam and Chava were chacham, and the snake was chacham. So he really understands that it's the same word. Again, opposing the Ibn Ezra that it's a play on words, because it's the same word. Adam and Chava were smart, and the snake was smart. Now then you have to understand, so wait, what does this pasuk mean then? Hey, what does v'lo yitboshashu mean? Because what? I understand, they were naked and not embarrassed. What's lo yitboshashu? He says the word yitboshashu doesn't mean naked. Boshesh has a different, what does boshesh mean? What?
It doesn't mean embarrassed.
It doesn't mean embarrassed. Boshesh means something else. It means boshesh like busha, but there's another word, boshesh, that we have in the Torah sometimes. When Moshe is not coming down from Har Sinai, we say he's boshesh. What does boshesh mean? He says, he explains, velo amtinu. Lo amtinu, they didn't, shahu, lashahot, wait, like remain. Tarry. They didn't tarry.
So the Targum Yonatan then has a complete different explanation for the pasuk. What does it says? V'hayushnem arumim, they were both smart, hadam v'ishta, v'lo yitbashashu, but they didn't tarry in this smartness. They didn't continue in this wisdom. What does it mean they didn't continue in this wisdom? Because they screwed up when the Nachash tricked them. And there you go, and then everything changed. So they were, and you know that they had to be a little bit wise before, because, they knew, Hashem told them, don't do this, they knew it was wrong, the snake convinced them. But there's another way I thought maybe to look at it also, which is the Netziv. The Netziv says in Nefesh HaChaim, he explains like this. He says, what does it mean, Etz Hadat? What? Wait, is the Netziv? Well, let's see. Rav Chaim, sorry, Rav Chaim of Volozhin. I thought Netziv of Volozhin. I got mixed up. You're right, yes. So, he says, what does it mean, Etz Hadat Tov V'Ra? He says, didn't Adam and Chava know what Tov V'Ra is before eating Etz Hadat Tov V'Ra? So he says, there's a different explanation of what Etz Hadat Tov V'Ra. Tov V'Ra, he explains, is the Iruv, the mixture of Tov and Ra. It's the tree of the mixing of good and bad. He says, once they ate of the tree, then everything in the world was like shades of gray. It used to be that things were black and white before, and you could pick to do black or white, but it was clearly one thing was black and one thing was white, good and evil. However, now everything is mixed together. And he says, even with people, even people are now a mixture of Tov and Ra. It used to be that a person was there and then the snake would be telling him Ra things. But now when you want to do Ra things, it sounds like you're saying to yourself, right? Because you're a mixture of Tov and Ra. He says, everything is now mixed. So he says that, therefore, the wisdom that they had before was knowing what is good and what is bad. And then after what happened was, not that they really gained wisdom, but that everything then became sort of intertwined and a mixture. And he says, and nowadays, well, he continues with Chaim and he says, Me'az garam al yedei zeh irbuvia. Now there's a big irbuvia. Kol maseh ha'adam, whatever people do is irbuvia. Pam tov v'pam ra. Sometimes people do good and people do bad. And also what happens is, larov, Bilti efshar larov, it's usually impossible. Shetiyeh kulat kadosh zacha. It's very difficult to do a pure, holy action v'nekiya legamre b'lishum netiya le'ezeh pniya, without a little bit of kind of ra, some sort of ego kind of a thing slipping in there. So even the good things that we do have a little bit of ra, and on the other hand, v'chen lahefech, even our bad things, you think you're doing right, so that's a little bit of tov mixed in there as well. So maybe that's another way to understand it, that before they had like a clear tov v'ra, and then it changed, but that they were always wise, and it's not that they turned smart at that point. But that's a whole different way of understanding the pasuk, and I think that the Targum Yonatan is doing that really to get away from the Ibn Ezra's interpretation that this is a word play. He says, no, it's the same exact word used 2 times, meaning the same exact thing both times. And I think that's but that gives a whole completely radical reinterpretation of this whole story in Sefer Bereshit, and what was the nature of it. It doesn't make like Adam and Chava were like these silly little gone naked Smurf-like children. Smurfs wear pants, but whatever. Running around in Gan Eden, not knowing anything till they eat of the tree. Here they knew, but it didn't last because they messed up. Alrighty, that is the story. So that's the story about Gematria and wordplay. Alrighty, see you later.
So before the